Graduation was supposed to be the moment that marked the beginning of my future, the culmination of years of hard work, sleepless nights, and relentless determination. It was meant to be the one day where nothing else mattered except walking across that stage, hearing my name, and seeing the pride in my parents' eyes. But as the spotlight was preparing to shine on me, my sister decided that it wasn't enough for me to finally have my moment. She couldn't let me bask in the applause without somehow twisting it into chaos. From the outside, my family always looked perfect. The kind of family you'd assume would celebrate milestones together without a hint of bitterness. But beneath the polished smiles and posed photographs was a current of rivalry that had been simmering for years. My sister, always craving attention, always needing to be the center of every gathering, saw my graduation not as my victory, but as her stage. And in that twisted perspective, she wasn't willing to let me shine alone. I didn't know it then, but her plan was carefully crafted. The very person I should have trusted to stand by me on my proudest day was plotting to turn it into a spectacle, one that would humiliate me in front of my peers, my professors, and my entire family. But what she didn't count on was my own resilience. I had spent years learning how to survive her little manipulations, her jabs disguised as jokes, her subtle ways of undercutting me. This time, however, I wasn't going to quietly step back and let her win. So while my sister thought she could ruin my once-in-a-lifetime event, she never realized that this time, the spotlight she craved would burn brighter on me than ever before. Graduation didn't come easy for me. Every achievement, every recognition, every step forward had been carved out of endless effort. I wasn't the kind of student who breezed through classes effortlessly or who charmed professors with quick wit. No, I was the one who stayed up, late in the library until my eyes blurred, who scribbled notes furiously while others seemed relaxed, who worked part-time jobs just to afford textbooks. When I look back, I don't see luck. I see persistence. And that persistence was finally about to be rewarded on graduation day. My sister, on the other hand, had always lived in a different orbit. She wasn't unintelligent. In fact, she was sharp in her own ways. But she had a natural magnetism that drew people to her without her needing to prove much. At family gatherings, she was the one who lit up the room, who told the funniest stories, who never failed to capture the spotlight. Growing up, I often stood in her shadow, not resenting her exactly, but always aware that the attention she received came so easily, while I had to claw my way for even a small piece of acknowledgement. Our family dynamics didn't help. My parents, though well-meaning, unintentionally fed into the imbalance. My sister was often praised for her charm, her looks, her social achievements, while my successes were acknowledged but rarely celebrated with the same enthusiasm. If she won a talent show, there would be a family dinner in her honor. If I aced an exam, the response would be a quick "good job" before the conversation drifted back to her latest adventures. It wasn't blatant favoritism, but it was enough to carve a quiet ache in me, a longing to be seen, truly seen, for what I had worked so hard to accomplish. Despite this undercurrent, my sister always wore the mask of supportive sibling. She never outright dismissed my efforts. In fact, she often said the right words at the right time. "I'm so proud of you," or "You deserve this." But there was always something in her tone, a slight pause, a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. That left me questioning whether she truly meant it. It was the kind of disguised envy that's easy to miss until you've felt it 1,000 times. As I prepared for graduation, her words of encouragement grew louder. She offered to help me pick out my outfit, to style my hair, even to drive me to the ceremony. At first, I thought maybe she was turning a corner, genuinely happy for me at last. Maybe this day would bridge the distance between us. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that her sudden involvement wasn't entirely selfless. Still, I chose to believe in her. After all, this was graduation, the one milestone I wanted to remember with joy. I told myself that family was family, that despite our differences, my sister would stand by me. I let myself hope that she might, just this once, allow me to take center stage without trying to reclaim it. The days leading up to the ceremony were filled with an almost surreal calm. My parents busied themselves with plans. Who would sit? Where we would go for dinner afterward? How many photos we would take? My friends congratulated me, professors shared their pride, and even my part-time boss gave me a handshake and a smile that meant more than he knew. For a brief moment, I felt like everything was finally aligning. I had earned this day. I had weathered every storm of self-doubt, every late-night breakdown, every financial hurdle. And now, here I was, standing at the edge of the finish line with my family, my sister included, seemingly ready to cheer me on. But beneath that calm exterior, something darker was brewing. The subtle hints of jealousy I had felt over the years weren't gone. They were just masked by her carefully chosen words. I didn't know it yet, but my sister wasn't preparing to celebrate me. She was preparing to strike when it mattered most. In hindsight, the signs were there. The way she lingered on conversations about how big the graduation would be. The almost offhand jokes about how she should be the one giving the speech, not me. The faint smirk when my parents reminded everyone that I would be the first in the family to graduate college. Each small detail was a warning I ignored, too eager to believe that things were different this time. If I had been more cautious, maybe I would have seen it coming. Maybe I would have shielded myself before, walking into the storm she had been quietly brewing. But I didn't. I let myself bask in the peace of the moment, unaware that my sister's envy was about to erupt in a way that would test me like never before. Because sometimes the calm before the storm isn't peace, it's preparation. And my sister had been preparing for this moment all along. The first cracks in the facade appeared quietly, almost too subtle to recognize at first. My sister had always been sharp-tongued, her humor biting in ways that often left me questioning whether she was joking or cutting me down. In the weeks leading up to my graduation, those remarks became more frequent, their edges sharper, their intent harder to ignore. It began innocently enough. When I showed her my cap and gown, carefully pressed and hanging like a badge of honor, she smirked and said, "It's just polyester, you know. Don't get too excited. You'll only wear it for a few hours." I laughed it off, forcing a smile, but inside, her words stung. To me, the gown represented years of sacrifice. To her, it was nothing but cheap fabric. A few days later, when I excitedly shared my graduation speech draft with the family, hoping for encouragement, my sister tilted her head and let out a small laugh. "Don't you think that's a little dramatic? It's a ceremony, not a Nobel Prize acceptance." She said it with that familiar tone, light enough to pass as teasing, heavy enough to land like a punch. My parents chuckled with her, brushing it off as just her sense of humor. But what they didn't see, or chose not to see, was the deliberate way her comments chipped at my confidence. That became her pattern, passive-aggressive jabs disguised as jokes, little undermining comments, delivered with a smile. If I practiced my walk across the living room, she'd roll her eyes. If I talked about who I was inviting, she'd mutter, "Wow, you act like Beyoncé is about to perform." The more I looked forward to my big day, the more determined she seemed to minimize it. I tried to voice my concerns once tentatively to my mother. "She keeps mocking me, Mom. I don't think she wants me to enjoy this." But my mother sighed, shaking her head. "You're being sensitive again. You know, your sister. She doesn't mean anything by it." That phrase, "you're being sensitive," was one I had heard too many times before. It was the family's go-to dismissal whenever my sister's behavior crossed the line. If I was hurt, the problem wasn't her cruelty, it was my inability to take a joke. If I confronted her, the narrative flipped. Suddenly, I was the aggressor. the one who blew things out of proportion. Gaslighting is an insidious thing. It doesn't happen in a single explosion. It creeps in slowly, wrapping itself around your reality until you start doubting your own instincts. And that's exactly what happened. Each time I questioned her behavior, my family painted me as the problem. Each time I bristled at her words, I was told to relax. It didn't matter how deliberate her barbs felt. As long as she delivered them with a laugh, everyone else decided it was harmless. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, I excitedly shared that my professor had nominated me for a small departmental award. It wasn't grand, but to me, it was proof that my effort was being seen. My father smiled and congratulated me, but before I could savor the moment, my sister chimed in. An award? For what? Spending the most nights buried in textbooks? She laughed, and my parents followed, shaking their heads fondly at her wit. I forced a smile, but the warmth drained from my chest. It wasn't just the words. It was the timing, the way she couldn't let me have a moment of joy without inserting herself, without reminding me that in her eyes, my accomplishments would never be enough. In quieter moments, her envy slipped through even more clearly. When we were alone, she would make little digs. You think this changes everything, don't you? You think walking across a stage suddenly makes you better? Her eyes would harden as she said it, her voice low, almost daring me to argue. But when I told others about it later, she'd deny it outright. I never said that, she'd claim, feigning innocence, and my family would nod, believing her without hesitation. The worst part wasn't just her words, it was how effective they were. Slowly, I began to question myself. Was I overreacting? Was graduation not such a big deal after all? Was I making too much of it, clinging to a moment that others found insignificant? That's the poison of gaslighting. It makes you mistrust your own joy, your own sense of reality. Still, deep inside, a part of me clung to the truth. I knew what this day meant. I knew the hours I had sacrificed, the nights I had cried, the weight I had carried just to get here. And I knew, no matter how much she tried to twist it, that I had earned the right to celebrate. But her persistence left scars. Each comment, each laugh, each dismissal became another stone in the wall she was building around me, isolating me from the support I should have felt. Instead of a family united in pride, I felt like an outsider fighting for scraps of acknowledgement, battling not just for recognition, but for the right to feel proud at all. And the more my sister mocked, the more the family minimized, the clearer. It became, this wasn't just about a ceremony, it was about control. It was about her need to dictate not just how others saw me, but how I saw myself. Looking back, those early red flags weren't small at all. They were warning signs flashing in neon, screaming that something darker was on the horizon. But at the time, I convinced myself they were harmless, just words, just jokes. I didn't realize then that those jokes were the opening act of the chaos to come. The storm was building, and my sister was the one gathering the clouds. Graduation week was supposed to be filled with joy, anticipation, and the sweet relief of knowing I had finally reached the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Instead, it became a minefield carefully designed by my sister. Every day seemed to reveal a new twist in her plan, subtle enough to be dismissed as coincidence, yet deliberate enough that I could feel her fingerprints all over it. It started with my gown. A few days before the ceremony, I pulled it out of the closet to try it on again. The fabric, once smooth, now bore strange wrinkles that refused to flatten, no matter how much I pressed or steamed. Worse still, there was a faint tear along the seam near the shoulder. My heart dropped. I had been so careful with it, treating it like a sacred artifact, only to discover it ruined at the last moment. When I asked my sister if she had touched it, she widened her eyes in mock innocence. Me? Why would I mess with your ugly curtain of a gown? You're so paranoid. But the smirk tugging at her lips told me everything I needed to know. She had tampered with it, maybe spilled something, maybe yanked at it out of spite. And now she was delighting in watching me scramble to fix it. I spent hours trying to mend the tear, all the while questioning myself. Was I imagining it? Was I giving her too much credit, assuming malice when it could have been an accident? The doubt gnawed at me, but my gut knew better. Then came the invitations. I had carefully listed out who I wanted to attend: close family, a few mentors, and my best friends who had supported me throughout college. Somehow, the list ended up in my sister's hands. She offered to help send them out, claiming she wanted to be part of the process. At first, I thought maybe this was her way of making amends, of showing she cared. But on the day of the ceremony, I noticed a strange imbalance in the crowd. People I had barely spoken to, acquaintances from high school, distant cousins who barely remembered my name, showed up in droves. Meanwhile, one of my closest friends texted me in heartbreak, saying she never got the invitation. When I confronted my sister later, she shrugged. "Oops, must have gotten mixed up. Don't worry, at least people showed up for you." The venom beneath her casual tone cut deep. She wasn't trying to help. She was reshaping my audience, surrounding me with people who wouldn't truly celebrate me, ensuring that the ones who mattered most were left out. As the week wore on, her sabotage escalated. Rumors began to swirl, whispers that I had only gotten through college because of favoritism from professors, that I was book-smart but clueless in the real world, that I had begged my parents for money I never actually received. The first time I overheard someone repeating these lies, I froze. My hands shook. Who could possibly be spreading this? But I didn't have to wonder long. My sister's voice carried through the hallway one afternoon as she leaned in close to one of my cousins, whispering about how unfair it was that I always played the victim while secretly manipulating everyone around me. The betrayal was suffocating. She wasn't just mocking me in private anymore. She was actively rewriting the narrative of my life, turning me into a fraud in the eyes of others. Each rumor eroded my sense of self-worth until I started questioning whether my achievements even meant anything. Was I truly deserving of this graduation, or had I convinced myself of a lie? The weight of her campaign pressed harder with every passing day, and yet somehow, she still managed to cloak it all in the guise of support. At family dinners, she'd loudly declare how proud she was of me, wrapping an arm around my shoulder, while flashing me a smile that felt more like a warning than affection. "My little sister, finally making it big," she'd say, her voice dripping with mock sincerity. Everyone laughed, everyone clapped, and I sat there hollowed out, screaming, silently, that it was all an act. The worst came 2 nights before graduation. My parents hosted a small gathering at our house, a pre-celebration for me. I was nervous but excited, ready to soak in the warmth of the moment. But the evening twisted quickly when my sister waltzed, in wearing a white dress, the kind that stole the eye immediately, bold and dazzling in its simplicity. She knew exactly what she was doing. All night long, people complimented her outfit, asked where she got it, told her she looked radiant. The gathering, meant for me, became her runway. I sat in the corner, my new outfit unnoticed, my presence fading in comparison to her carefully orchestrated glow. And as if that wasn't enough, she made sure to interject herself into every conversation. When someone asked me about my plans, after graduation, she'd cut in with a story about her own big opportunities on the horizon. If someone tried to congratulate me, she'd redirect the spotlight with a joke or a sarcastic comment. It was relentless. I wanted to scream, to demand that everyone see what she was doing, but I knew how it would look. To them, I'd just be the jealous sister, insecure and petty in the face of her natural charisma. That's how gaslighting works. It isolates you until even your own truths sound unbelievable when spoken aloud. By the end of the week, I felt drained, broken down to the point of questioning whether graduation was even worth celebrating anymore. The day that had once filled me with pride now loomed like a storm cloud. My sister had succeeded in turning joy into dread, anticipation into anxiety. And yet, despite it all, a tiny flame of defiance still burned inside me. Because deep down, I knew something she didn't. She could tamper with my gown. She could manipulate invitations. She could spread rumors and hog attention. But she couldn't rewrite the truth of my journey. Every late night, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt I had overcome, that was mine. She couldn't steal it, no matter how hard she tried. Still, the damage was real. By the time graduation day arrived, I was walking into it battered and weary, carrying not just the weight of my own expectations, but the crushing shadow of her sabotage. And as I stood in front of the mirror that morning, adjusting the mended seam of my gown, I realized this wasn't just about walking across a stage. It was about surviving the storm she had unleashed and proving, once and for all, that no amount of envy or manipulation could dim the light I had fought so hard to ignite. The audience doesn't just feel frustration here, they share it. They see the sabotage, they feel the sting of the rumors, they experience the heartbreak of stolen moments. And in that shared outrage, they lean closer, waiting to see not just if I will endure, but how I will rise. Because if she thought she had stolen the spotlight, she was about to learn a lesson she'd never forget. The spotlight has a way of finding the one who truly deserves it. Graduation morning should have felt like triumph. The air was alive with anticipation. The smell of fresh flowers mingled with the starch of pressed gowns, and the campus buzzed with laughter and chatter. For everyone else, it was the celebration of a lifetime. For me, it was walking into a battlefield disguised as a ceremony, with my sister pulling the strings from the shadows. The first blow came as I was getting dressed. I reached for my cap, the final piece of my outfit, only to find the box empty. My stomach dropped. I tore through drawers, closets, even the car, panic mounting with each passing minute. The cap was gone. I remembered clearly setting it aside the night before, safely tucked on the dresser. Now it had vanished. My sister appeared in the doorway, perfectly polished in yet another attention-grabbing outfit. She tilted her head and raised an eyebrow. "Lose something?" she asked, her tone syrupy sweet. I wanted to scream, to accuse her outright, but what proof did I have? The silence between us said more than words. She smiled, offered me a half-hearted, "Don't stress, it's just a hat," and strolled away. Just a hat. To her, maybe. To me, it was a symbol of every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every ounce of effort. And now, on the very morning I was supposed to wear it proudly, it was gone. I scrambled for a solution. A friend lent me an extra cap, slightly too big and fraying at the edges, but it would have to do. As I slipped it on, humiliation burned in my chest. Even before stepping out the door, I felt diminished, like I had already lost control of my own day. When I arrived at the ceremony, the chaos only deepened. My name was printed in the program under the list of graduates scheduled to give speeches, something I had worked tirelessly on for weeks. But when the order was announced, my name was skipped. Confused, I approached an organizer who frowned and said, "Your sister told us you weren't comfortable speaking in front of the crowd. She said you decided to withdraw." The world tilted beneath me. She had gone behind my back, presenting herself as my spokesperson, erasing the one chance I had to share my voice. "That's not true," I insisted, my voice shaking. But by then, the schedule had been set, the list finalized. My moment had been stolen before it even began. I fought to keep my composure as the ceremony unfolded, clapping and smiling for classmates. But inside, I was unraveling. Each announcement, each cheer from the audience felt like salt on an open wound. When my name was finally called, I walked across the stage with trembling hands. The two big caps slipped slightly, and I could hear my sister's stifled laugh from the audience, sharp and cruel. What should have been the proudest step of my life felt like trudging through mud, my accomplishment overshadowed by the humiliation she had orchestrated. And still, my family sided with her. When I whispered to my parents what had happened with the speech, my mother shook her head. "You must have misunderstood. Your sister was just trying to help." My father added, "Don't let little things ruin your big day." Little things. Missing cap, stolen speech, constant sabotage. Little things. The dismissal cut deeper than the sabotage itself. It wasn't just my sister working against me. It was my family refusing to see it. Their blind faith in her left me standing alone, battling not only her cruelty but their indifference. The isolation was unbearable. At one point, overwhelmed, I slipped away to the restroom, locking myself inside a stall. Tears blurred my vision as I sank onto the closed lid, clutching the frayed cap in my hands. The humiliation weighed heavy, pressing on my chest until I could barely breathe. I thought of all the years I had worked for this, all the nights I had pushed myself past exhaustion, all the times I had believed that this day would make it worth it. And now, here I was, broken and small, wondering if she had succeeded in destroying it all. But as the sobs subsided, something else rose inside me. A quiet, simmering determination. My sister had spent years trying to undermine me, and graduation was her grand performance. But if I let her succeed, if I allowed this day to be defined by her cruelty, then everything I had endured would mean nothing. I looked at myself in the mirror, eyes red, makeup smudged, gown slightly wrinkled. I didn't see perfection, but I saw survival. I saw someone who had fought too hard to crumble now. When I stepped back into the ceremony, I carried that resolve with me. The pain didn't vanish, the humiliation didn't magically dissolve, but I held my head higher. I clapped louder for my classmates. I smiled more fiercely at the audience, and when I locked eyes with my sister, I let her see that she hadn't broken me. She had stolen moments, yes. She had inflicted wounds, but she hadn't taken the one thing that mattered most: my strength to endure, to rise, to claim what was mine. And in that moment of quiet defiance, I realized something crucial. This wasn't the end of the story. This was the breaking point, yes, but also the beginning of something new. The storm had reached its peak, but within me, the determination was building, gathering strength for the strike that would come next. Because if graduation was supposed to be my downfall, she had underestimated me. I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. When the last applause of the graduation ceremony faded, I should have been left basking in pride. Instead, I stood in the aftermath of chaos, surrounded by fragments of a day my sister had tried to shatter, the missing cap, the stolen speech, the family's blind defense of her. Those wounds still stung, but I refused to let them consume me. What had begun as humiliation was slowly transforming into something else, something steadier, something powerful. I remember the walk from the auditorium to the courtyard where graduates and families mingled for pictures. The air was heavy with chatter, camera shutters clicking like applause, and bursts of laughter from every corner. In that crowd of joy, I felt strangely detached, as if I were both participant and observer. My family swarmed around my sister, praising her choice of outfit, letting her orchestrate group photos, while I lingered at the edges. To anyone else, I must have looked invisible. But inside, a quiet fire was spreading. Every step I took through the crowd felt deliberate, controlled. I forced myself to walk slowly, shoulders straight, refusing to crumble. My sister wanted me frantic, broken, desperate for attention. She had engineered a spectacle to watch me unravel, but I would not give her that satisfaction. Instead, I gave her silence. I smiled for the cameras. I adjusted my gown. I nodded politely to relatives who barely acknowledged me. Outwardly, I was calm. Inwardly, I was memorizing everything. It was then that I began to notice the subtle nods of recognition from people outside my family. A professor I deeply respected caught my eye, giving me a small, encouraging smile as if to say, "I see you." One of my classmates, who had witnessed the speech debacle, pulled me aside and whispered, "That wasn't right, what happened. Everyone knows you worked for it." Even a passing friend who barely knew me beyond group projects squeezed my arm gently and said, "Congrats. You deserved this." These weren't grand gestures, but they were lifelines. Each one reminded me that truth has witnesses, even when family chooses blindness. My sister might control the narrative at home, but she couldn't erase the respect I had earned from others. That validation mattered. It was oxygen when I felt suffocated. I spent the evening deliberately quiet. Where once I would have fought, for space in conversations, demanded acknowledgement, or defended myself, I chose stillness. I let my sister prattle on about how she had saved the day when my cap went missing, spinning tales of how she volunteered to help with speech, scheduling. Her lies flowed effortlessly, and my parents lapped them up. But I didn't argue. I watched. I listened. I let her weave her web, knowing that every false word she spoke would one day be the rope she'd hang herself with. In my silence, I found strength. There's a power in not reacting, in withholding the eruption others expect. My sister thrived on drama, feeding on the chaos she created. By denying her my outrage, I starved her of the fuel she craved. And though the hurt inside me was raw, the quietness felt like armor. That night, when I finally returned home, I sat alone in my room and allowed myself to replay the day. Not as a victim, but as a strategist. Every humiliation became a piece of evidence, every cruel smirk a confirmation of her intentions. I thought of her smug expression when the organizer mentioned the speech, the laughter when my cap slipped, the way she basked in the spotlight as if the graduation were hers. Each memory hardened into resolve. I began journaling, not in scattered bursts of pain, but in careful detail. I wrote down times, words, gestures, everything I could remember. At first, it was just a way to process, but the more I wrote, the more I realized it was becoming a blueprint. I wasn't only documenting betrayal, I was preparing for something bigger. My sister thought she had won. She believed she had buried me under embarrassment and stolen moments. But she hadn't anticipated the kind of strength that grows in silence, the kind that doesn't scream but builds, steady and unshakable. The days after graduation followed the same pattern, her flaunting, my restraint. At a family dinner, she boasted loudly about how selfless she had been to step in during my supposed stage fright. My parents praised her maturity, calling her the true star of the family. The words stung, but I bit my tongue. Every false compliment they showered on her was another lie exposed to me, another crack in the illusion. Meanwhile, I poured myself into my own quiet victories. Professors continued reaching out with congratulations, classmates shared pictures where I was front and center, and my diploma arrived in the mail. My name printed in bold, undeniable letters. These small reminders became anchors, keeping me steady while the storm raged at home. Friends noticed too. One afternoon, as I sat with two close friends at a cafe, they leaned in and said, "We know what she did. We've seen it all before, but you handled it better than anyone else could." Their words lit something inside me. It wasn't about applause or revenge, not yet. It was about reclaiming my dignity, piece by piece. By the end of that week, my sister's victory began to feel hollow. She had won the battle of appearances, but I was quietly gathering strength for the war of truth. And unlike her, I wasn't reckless. I wasn't desperate. I could wait. Patience became my weapon. With every passing day, I grew less reactive, less vulnerable to her traps. She noticed the shift, I could tell. Her comments grew sharper, her digs more desperate, as if she couldn't stand that I wasn't breaking. She thrived on spectacle, but I denied her the stage. In the silence I carried, anticipation brewed. My revenge wouldn't come in fiery outbursts or petty squabbles. It would come with precision, when every piece was aligned, when her lies had piled so high they could no longer hold her weight. Walking through chaos with composure, I realized, was its own kind of rebellion. My sister wanted me destroyed, but instead she had forged something she could never match. Resilience born of fire, sharpened by betrayal, strengthened by stillness. The spotlight she craved had burned her hollow. The one she tried to steal from, me, was waiting brighter than ever, because when the moment came, I wouldn't just reclaim it. I would blind her with it. The moment I had been waiting for finally arrived, not just the walk across the stage, not the diploma in my hands, but the chance to speak. Despite every obstacle my sister had engineered, I stood behind the podium, my heart pounding but steady, facing an auditorium filled with classmates, professors, and families. My name echoed through the speakers, a sound that seemed to slice through the weeks of tension, betrayal, and humiliation. I could feel my sister's eyes on me from the front row, sharp and restless. She had done everything in her power to prevent this moment. But here I was, cap slightly crooked from her earlier sabotage, speech papers clutched in my hand like fragile armor. The whispers of the crowd died into silence, leaving only the soft hum of the microphone. I began not with perfection, but with honesty. Graduation isn't just about grades or honors, I said, my voice clear, carrying across the hall. For many of us, it's about the battles we fought silently to reach this stage. The obstacles we faced weren't always from textbooks. They sometimes came from the very people who were supposed to cheer us on. The audience leaned forward. Professors adjusted in their seats, families looked at each other, and a hush of curiosity rippled through the room. I wasn't calling out names, but the truth was undeniable. The words weren't just mine. They belonged to everyone who had ever felt undermined, overlooked, or betrayed on their way to success. I went on, weaving the story of resilience into every sentence. I spoke about perseverance when resources were scarce, about finding courage in moments of doubt, and about the quiet victories that no one clapped for, but mattered just as much as the big ones. My voice grew stronger with each line, steady and unshaken. For the first time, I wasn't speaking to prove myself to my family. I was speaking for me. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught my sister shifting uncomfortably in her seat. Her smirk faltered. She hadn't expected me to turn my broken pieces into a speech that resonated with hundreds of people. She wanted me humiliated, small, silenced. Instead, I was amplified. When I spoke the closing line, sometimes the greatest, strength comes not from those who cheer the loudest, but from finding your own voice when no one else believes in you. The hall erupted. The applause wasn't polite or obligatory. It was thunderous, rising like a wave and washing over me. Classmates stood, professors clapped with genuine admiration, and even strangers in the crowd wiped away tears. Cameras flashed, capturing not a girl broken by betrayal, but a graduate glowing with hard-won pride. That applause was a spotlight no sabotage could dim. Meanwhile, my sister's envy played out in real time. At first, she clapped reluctantly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But as the cheers grew louder, drowning out everything else, her composure began to crack. She shifted in her seat, her hands tightening around her phone, her face flushed with frustration. Then, in what could only be described as desperation, she tried to reclaim attention. She stood abruptly, pretending to adjust her dress as though she were part of the moment, angling herself so the cameras might catch her. She even let out an exaggerated cheer, louder than the crowd, but it rang hollow. Instead of drawing admiration, people turned to look at her with raised eyebrows. Her antics stood in stark contrast to the genuine emotion flooding the room. The harder she tried, the clearer her envy became. She laughed too loudly at nothing, clapped off beat, even whispered dramatically to my mother as though orchestrating her own performance. But the more she fought for the spotlight, the more invisible she became. No one was watching her. All eyes were on me. And here's the beauty of it. I didn't need to expose her. I didn't need to call her out or drag her into the light. Her humiliation unfolded naturally, crafted not by my revenge, but by her own desperation. She had spent weeks plotting to make me crumble, only to watch me soar higher than she could reach. The climax wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It wasn't me shouting or pointing fingers. It was silence, the silence of letting her dig her own grave as the applause drowned her out. My victory was effortless, because it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth shining so brightly that lies couldn't survive in its glow. When the ceremony ended, students swarmed me for photos. Professors shook my hand with pride, and even acquaintances congratulated me with sincerity. The cameras clicked, capturing smiles, diplomas, and laughter. In every shot, I stood tall, radiant in a way no sabotage could erase. My sister lingered on the sidelines, her smile brittle, her presence fading. She had wanted the spotlight so desperately, but in the end it consumed her. That night, as I looked through the pictures, one image stood out. It was a candid shot, me laughing with classmates, my cap tilted slightly, my diploma in hand. In the background, blurred and almost unrecognizable, was my sister, watching. For once, she wasn't in the center. She wasn't the star. She was just an afterthought, a shadow on the edge of my triumph. And that was the twist she never saw coming. She didn't need to be defeated. She defeated herself. The ceremony had given me more than a diploma. It gave me closure. It reminded me that real strength doesn't come from tearing others down, but from rising in spite of them. My sister's envy had nearly destroyed me, but in the end, it only highlighted my resilience. The spotlight wasn't hers to steal. It never was. It was mine all along. And when it finally found me, it revealed not just my success, but the emptiness of her envy. The ceremony may have ended with applause, but the story didn't stop there. In many ways, the real unraveling began once the crowd had dispersed, the caps had been tossed, and the families made their way toward the exit. I had expected a quiet evening of celebration with my friends, maybe a family dinner filled with polite smiles. Instead, I found myself at the center of a storm I hadn't caused, watching as years of hidden hypocrisy cracked wide open. It started the moment I stepped off the stage. My sister cornered me in the hallway, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Her face carried that familiar mask of forced composure, but I could see the fury boiling underneath. She leaned in, her voice low and venomous. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she hissed. "Making that little speech about obstacles, about people not cheering for you. You were talking about me, weren't you?" I didn't flinch. For once, her words didn't sting. Instead, they sounded hollow, like an echo bouncing off walls that no longer held me captive. "If the shoe fits," I said simply, my tone calm but firm. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw something I'd never seen in her before: fear. Not of me, but of the truth. She knew the applause hadn't just been for my words. It had been a silent acknowledgement from everyone present that her antics had failed. Her desperation to control the spotlight had backfired spectacularly, leaving her exposed. The confrontation didn't end there. Later that evening, as the family gathered at a restaurant for dinner, the tension was thick enough to taste. My parents, who had spent years brushing off my concerns, sat stiffly, their forced smiles cracking at the edges. They tried to congratulate me, but their words were cautious, like they were afraid of setting off another explosion. My sister, however, couldn't let it go. She launched into a rant about how unfair it was that I had made her look bad, twisting the story so that somehow she was the victim. But this time, something unusual happened. My family didn't jump to her defense. Instead, they shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. My mother avoided eye contact. For once, the silence wasn't directed at me. It was directed at her. And in that silence, her power evaporated. Relatives who had once gushed over her, friends who always seemed to side with her, began pulling away in the weeks that followed. The story of my speech spread quickly. Professors mentioned it in classes, peers posted clips online, and soon enough, everyone knew what had happened at graduation. The spotlight she had craved so desperately had found me instead, and it illuminated her behavior for what it really was: petty, jealous, and cruel. Social fallout came swiftly. Friends who had once orbited around her charm stopped answering her calls. Relatives who once praised her accomplishments began whispering behind her back, questioning her motives. She had always thrived on being admired, but admiration turned into skepticism, then into avoidance. The more she tried to explain herself, the more transparent her bitterness became. Meanwhile, I didn't have to lift a finger. I didn't need revenge or confrontation. Justice unfolded on its own, calmly and cleanly. Every person who had ever doubted me now saw the truth without me saying another word. That was the sweetest victory of all, not proving her wrong, but letting her prove it herself. There was one moment, though, that stood out above the rest. A week after graduation, I ran into one of my professors in town. She congratulated me warmly, then lowered her voice and said, "You know, I've taught here for 20 years, and I've never seen a speech like yours. It wasn't just powerful, it was liberating. You didn't just graduate with honors. You graduated from a prison your family built for you." Those words struck me deeply, because that's exactly what it felt like. For years, I had been trapped in a cycle of rivalry, gaslighting, and dismissal. But that day, I walked free, not just from school, but from their control. As for my sister, she never admitted defeat outright. That wasn't her style. Instead, she simmered, throwing occasional barbed comments my way, hoping to get a reaction. But the difference now was that I no longer gave her the satisfaction. I had learned that her power only existed if I acknowledged it. Without my attention, her anger was nothing more than noise. Over time, the distance between us grew wider. She was no longer the center of family gatherings, no longer the loudest voice in the room. People began to see through her charm, recognizing the envy that had always lingered beneath the surface. And while part of me mourned the sister I wished I had, a larger part of me felt relief. I didn't need her approval anymore. I didn't need her validation. Graduation had given me more than a diploma. It had given me clarity. It had shown me who truly stood beside me and who was willing to let me fall. My friends who cheered for me that day, the professors who applauded my resilience, the classmates who congratulated me with sincerity, they became my chosen circle, a reminder that family isn't always defined by blood. Looking back, I realized that my sister's downfall wasn't the point of the story. The point was that I had finally stopped letting her write my narrative. For years, she had cast herself as the star and me as the supporting role. But in that one moment, under that spotlight, I took back the pen. And the ending? It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, steady, and deeply satisfying. She didn't lose because I destroyed her. She lost because she could no longer control me. That was the true aftermath of betrayal. Not vengeance, not chaos, but peace. Peace that came from knowing I had survived her schemes and come out stronger. Peace that came from recognizing my worth wasn't tied to her approval. Peace that came from finally being free. The irony, of course, was that in trying to ruin my graduation, she ended up giving me the greatest gift of all, the chance to rise in front of everyone and prove, once and for all, that I was more than the shadow she tried to keep me in. And as I moved forward into the next chapter of my life, I carried that peace with me, like a quiet victory that no one could ever take away. In the quiet weeks after graduation, when the applause had faded and the cap and gown were carefully folded away, I found myself replaying everything that had happened. Not just the chaos of my sister's sabotage or the sting of my family's silence, but the entire journey that had brought me there. For the first time in years, I wasn't consumed by anger or humiliation. I was reflective, almost peaceful, because I realized something profound. Betrayal had not broken me. It had shaped me. Looking back, every passive-aggressive comment, every mocking laugh, every "you're overreacting" dismissal had become fuel for my growth. At the time, it felt like drowning, like being constantly pulled under by people who were supposed to keep me afloat. But surviving those moments taught me lessons no textbook ever could. I learned patience in the face of cruelty. I learned strength when no one offered support. And most importantly, I learned that my worth was never tied to their approval. For so long, I believed my sister's envy could steal my light. Every time she overshadowed me at family gatherings or twisted my achievements into jokes, I felt myself shrink a little. But what I didn't see then, and what graduation finally taught me, is that no one can truly steal your light. At best, they can dim it temporarily, casting shadows with their jealousy. But the flame itself? That belongs to you, and you alone. This realization shifted everything. Instead of seeing myself as a victim of her schemes, I began to view myself as someone who had endured and come out stronger. Betrayal was no longer just a wound, it was a catalyst. It pushed me to stand taller, to speak louder, to own my space in a world that often told me to step aside. I started to notice how resilience had quietly taken root in me long before that graduation day. It was in the nights I stayed up studying, while the rest of the house slept, proving my determination to no one but myself. It was in the times I swallowed tears after yet another of my sister's cutting remarks, choosing to keep moving forward instead of collapsing. Resilience wasn't something I suddenly discovered. It had been with me all along, waiting for me to recognize it, and that recognition became my liberation. Instead of replaying her cruelty in my head, I began to ask myself different questions. What dreams had I silenced because of fear? What goals had I abandoned because I thought I wasn't worthy? What parts of me had I hidden just to keep the peace? Answering those questions was painful, but it was also freeing. I realized that my life could no longer revolve around surviving someone else's envy. It had to revolve around building my own joy, my own success, my own peace. In this transformation, I discovered a truth I wish someone had told me years ago. Your light isn't meant to please others. It isn't meant to be negotiated, shared, or hidden to make someone else comfortable. Your light is meant to guide you, to remind you who you are when everyone else tries to rewrite your story. The more I leaned into that truth, the more I felt empowered. Small choices became declarations of independence. Choosing to celebrate my wins, even if my family rolled their eyes, was an act of self-love. Surrounding myself with friends who saw me, truly saw me, became an act of resistance against years of invisibility. Even the act of sitting quietly in my room, acknowledging my worth without anyone else's validation, became revolutionary. I began to see my sister not as an all-powerful figure capable of ruining me, but as someone trapped. In her own prison of envy, she had spent so much energy trying to dim my light that she never nurtured her own. And that realization freed me from resentment. Her actions said more about her pain than about my worth. This shift didn't erase the betrayal or the scars it left, but it reframed them. Instead of carrying them as burdens, I carried them as reminders of resilience. Like cracks in pottery filled with gold, my scars became proof of survival, symbols of strength rather than shame. The empowerment that followed was quiet but unshakable. I no longer needed the spotlight to prove I mattered. I no longer needed applause to feel accomplished. My power came from within, from the simple, unshakable knowledge that I had walked through fire and come out intact. And here's the part I want anyone listening to hear. Betrayal may wound you, but it cannot define you unless you let it. The key: people who try to steal your moment, your joy, your voice, they don't have that power. They never did. The only power they hold is the power you give them. And once you take it back, once you realize that your light belongs only to you, their grip vanishes. If graduation taught me anything, it was this. The people who try to ruin you often end up handing you the tools to rebuild yourself stronger. My sister thought she was tearing me down, but in reality she was shaping the foundation of a resilience she could never touch. So yes, she tried to ruin my graduation. Yes, she tried to steal my spotlight. But in the end, all she really did was teach me that my spotlight isn't something fragile that others can take away. It's something eternal, something that burns from within. And once I embraced that, I stopped fighting to be seen and started choosing to shine. That is the transformation betrayal gave me. Not bitterness, not endless anger, but empowerment. A deep, lasting belief that no matter how dark the shadows around me, my light will always rise again. And that, more than any diploma or applause, is the victory I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. The night after graduation, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events. In slow motion. For years I had imagined that moment. The walk across the stage, the applause, the weight of the diploma in my hands. I had feared that my sister's sabotage would overshadow it forever. But instead, as I looked back, all I saw was light. My light. Not the chaos she tried to create, not the whispers or the missing cap, not even the sting of my family's dismissal. What lingered was the memory of my voice echoing through the hall, of my words rising above every attempt to silence me, of an entire audience standing to honor me. That was the turning point. For so long, I believed that my story was one of survival, of enduring her cruelty, of making it despite her sabotage. But lying there, I realized my story was bigger than that. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. My resilience. My triumph. My refusal to let betrayal become my legacy. That's when I made a decision. I would no longer measure my worth against her shadows. I would no longer waste energy wondering why my family didn't defend me or why she couldn't be happy for me. Those questions were heavy chains, binding me to a past that no longer served me. Instead, I chose to step forward, unburdened. The truth is, her toxicity was never mine to carry. She tried to make me believe it was, tried to convince me that her envy was my fault, that my achievements were somehow a crime against her. But standing on that stage proved otherwise. Her bitterness belonged to her, and her alone. My job wasn't to fix her, or to make myself smaller so she could feel bigger. My job was to live fully, brightly, unapologetically. And so I did. In the weeks and months that followed, I embraced the future with a confidence I never thought possible. Opportunities that once intimidated me became exciting challenges. Conversations that once silenced me now flowed with clarity and strength. Even in small, everyday moments, ordering coffee, meeting new people, standing up for myself at work, I felt a new steadiness in my voice. The kind of steadiness that only comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you've survived. My sister, on the other hand, found herself increasingly isolated. People who once laughed at her jokes now saw the cruelty behind them. Relatives, who once excused her behavior, began to whisper about her bitterness. And though a part of me had once craved that vindication, I realized I didn't need it anymore. Her downfall was not my victory. My victory was in rising above, in refusing to let her drag me down with her. Still, there was a strange symmetry in it all. She had craved the spotlight so desperately that she tried to snatch it from me. Yet in doing so, she only revealed her own emptiness. And me? I didn't even have to fight her for it. I simply stepped into the light that was already mine. That's the irony of betrayal. Those who try to tear you down often end up building the very stage where you rise. My sister thought she was orchestrating my humiliation, but in reality, she was setting the scene for my transformation. Her sabotage wasn't my end, it was my beginning. And here's the moral I want to leave behind, the one that still echoes in my heart. Success is the ultimate revenge. Not the kind of revenge that seeks to hurt or destroy, but the kind that rises so far above the pettiness that it renders it meaningless. Success doesn't just silence your doubters, it drowns them out entirely. On graduation day, I didn't need to scream at my family to see the truth. I didn't need to expose every cruel word my sister had whispered behind closed doors. All I had to do was stand tall, speak my truth, and let my achievements shine. The applause spoke louder than any accusation ever could, and so, as I move forward, I carry that lesson with me. The best way to respond to betrayal is to keep winning, to keep shining, to keep walking into every room as though the spotlight was built for you, because it was. Not because you stole it, not because you begged for it, but because you earned it. She tried to ruin my graduation. She tried to humiliate me, to make me doubt myself, to strip me of a moment I had worked my entire life to earn. But instead, I took the spotlight she craved. Not just for a day, not just for a ceremony, but for the rest of my life. Because the truth is, no one can take away what's truly yours. They can sabotage, they can scheme, they can twist the narrative, but they cannot rewrite your destiny. The diploma in my hands, the applause in that hall, the fire in my chest, that was mine. It always was. As I close this chapter, I no longer see myself as the girl who almost lost her graduation to her sister's cruelty. I see myself as the woman who rose above it, who turned betrayal into empowerment, who walked into the spotlight with grace and left with power. And that's where the story ends. Not with bitterness, not with revenge, not even with vindication, but with freedom. Freedom from her toxicity, freedom from my family's silence, freedom from every doubt that ever tried to chain me down. My sister will have to live with the choices she made, with the envy that consumed her, with the shadows she created. But me? I will live with the knowledge that I conquered it all without losing myself. So let this be the mic drop ending. She tried to ruin my graduation, but in doing so, she gave me the greatest gift, proof that my light cannot be dimmed. She wanted the spotlight. She schemed for it, begged for it, sabotaged for it. But in the end, it found me anyway. Because the spotlight doesn't belong to the loudest voice or the cruelest hand. It belongs to the one who shows up, who perseveres, who shines. Despite it all, and that's me. That will always be me.